I hope that I'm not the only one who's saying this, but my generation has a huge problem. You see, I was on TikTok the other day to figure out what kind of trends are floating around, and I was honestly shocked by how much mental illness is being romanticized. Instead of taking mental health seriously and discussing how one can actually better themselves so that misery is limited, we are straight up making memes and lifestyles out of being broke and depressed, traumatized, and anxious. I'm talking about everything from people justifying childish and irrational behavior because of self-diagnosed mental health conditions, to people resonating with psychopath movie characters or a lonely penguin by saying literally me. And I'll be honest, even I find some of the videos funny and somewhat touching, but the more I think about it, the more I realize how indulging in this kind of content does nothing but provide temporary emotional relief to a problem that urgently needs to be addressed at its root cause. But you see, the latter is exactly what we're not doing. Instead, we're promoting victim narratives, bonding over escapism, creating a lifestyle out of resenting the things we so urgently need to do in order to get the things we constantly complain we lack. In my opinion, that just leads to nowhere. You see, I came across an article from the Annie E. Casey Foundation that amalgamated a lot of self-report surveys to one report. And if I just look at the data here, let's go through some of these bullet points. A 2023 Gallup survey found that almost half, so 47% of Gen Zers ages 12 to 26 often or always feel anxious, and more than 1 in 5, so 22% often or always feel depressed. But that's not the only one, so let's look at the next one. Among Gen Z young adults ages 18 to 24, a fall 2022 Census Bureau survey found that more than 2 in 5, so 44%, reported persistent nervous, on edge, or anxious feelings, and 1 in 3, so 33%, reported persistent depressed, down, or hopeless feelings. Sounds pretty bad, right? Let's look at the next one. According to a 2022 federal survey of nearly 15,000 Gen Z youth ages 12 to 17, 1 in 5, so 20%, had a major depressive episode in the previous year. It's of course very important to remember that all of this data stems from self-reported surveys and therefore there is no clinical involvement here, which is why the numbers realistically perhaps could be a little bit different. But to be honest, with all the shit that I see that's getting posted on TikTok and sometimes even Instagram, it wouldn't surprise me if these numbers turn out to be true. And that leads you to my next data point. This one's from an S&P Global Market Intelligence Kagan survey, and what does it show? Average daily hours spent on social media by age generation in 2025 in the US. And what do we see here? Gen Z, 5.1 hours. Even to me, this number seems pretty brutal, but I think it gets much worse when we multiply it times 7 so that we get the weekly estimate. We total up at 35 hours. That's a full-time job of consuming content. And I mean, if I spent that much time a week consuming pointless social media content, okay, let's be generous here. Let's say you consume 25 hours a week. Of course I would be miserable. And to be honest, that's exactly what happened a year ago. You see, a year ago I had the flu, so I wasn't able to do the things I usually so love to do. So I wasn't able to exercise, I wasn't able to socialize, I wasn't able to study because focusing was simply so hard. So I was more likely to be on my phone consuming pointless content. That's exactly what happened. My phone time went up by multiple hours a day. I was consuming useless stuff. And to be honest, a month later, so when the sickness was over, I noticed the mental ramifications of all of it. I literally had the worst mental month of my whole life. Like every second I was just hoping for shit to get better, for something to change, for the misery and pain to go away. But it never happened because I simply didn't want to take responsibility for it. What a coincidence, my life got better once I did start to take responsibility for it. Once I got off my phone, funny thing, I actually went on a dopamine detox, as all of the people call it nowadays, for 3 months. I made a whole video on it, you can watch it there. I exercised more, I socialized more, I did more meaningful things, and I was happy again. I didn't expect that to happen. And that leads you to an issue that I have of how mental health is currently diagnosed and talked about. Does the diagnosis forbid people from living a good life? Why am I asking this? Let's say in March, some therapist diagnosed me with being depressed or having some kind of mental health condition that aligns with feeling miserable and anxious. Would I have allowed myself to feel happy in summer when I was doing all these meaningful things, or would I have forbid myself from doing so because I have a mental health condition that does not allow me to feel good, or that reduces the probability of me being able to enjoy my life? See, that's a question I'll never be able to answer, but there is a question we will be able to answer. In fact, that's the question of this video. Has my generation, so Gen Z, made itself deliberately incompetent? Or are we actually victims of modern society? Is it our environment that gives us no choice but to doom scroll, people please, drink, smoke, goon, procrastinate, and live in parasocial relationships? Or Is it our lack of motivation, structure, social skills, and confidence? Is it the virtuous narrative of it's okay to be weak that is causing us to be mentally and physically out of shape? Or is it our own inability to discern whether or not it's the right time to allow ourselves to be vulnerable? Is it the social media algorithms that are causing us to be more divided and comparison driven than ever before? Or is it our own laziness? Our refusal to accept that everybody has a different story, a different lifestyle, and without a different political opinion, and that everybody has their own problems to deal with, even if their life looks amazing on the surface. There's a reason I'm asking these questions. You see, it's much easier for us to outsource responsibility in direct pain outwards through resentment and scorn than actually calling ourselves out. And what does all of this do? It essentially puts us in a position where we are powerless, where we do not have the answers to our problems. And once we start accepting that we have no power, we start making a lifestyle out of it. And that's how we end up with the TikTok videos and trends I referred to at the beginning of this video. And the funny thing here is that the societal setup reminds me a lot of Nietzsche's philosophy of slave morality. I think understanding it is going to do a very good job of answering the question of this video. So when Nietzsche talks about slave morality, he's describing a shift that happened in the ancient world. In places like Greece and Rome, the aristocratic warrior class defined what was good. They looked at themselves and said, we are strong, proud, and powerful, and therefore we are good, and everything that is unlike us is bad. This is what Nietzsche also referred to as the master morality. But you see, many groups under Roman rule had no political or military power. It was clear for them that they could not win physically, so the battle moved into morality. What they essentially did was they flipped the logic. Everything that the aristocrats value is evil, and therefore everything that the slaves are forced to become is good. Pride becomes sin, power becomes corruption, humility and suffering become virtue, and so on. This is what Nietzsche refers to as the slave morality. But you see, here's the difference. Back then, the moral redefinition came from real external powerlessness, but today that is not the case. No one is forbidding us from improving our lives, but yet that's how we behave. Mostly because we outsource all the responsibility, we outsource our agency. We procrastinate, we consume more than we produce, we do everything in our power to avoid discomfort, accountability, and failure. We hope that everything around us changes while we do not. And the big problem here is that when this kind of mindset and behavior turns into a lifestyle and spreads amongst the youth, a similar pattern to Nietzsche's slave morality appears. Working your ass off for grinding becomes toxic, having ambition becomes problematic, being disciplined all of a sudden is fatphobic. Weakness is not something that we all of a sudden want to overcome, but something that we try to defend. It becomes something virtuous. What this ends up leading to is a bubble of stagnation that feels safe and normal. It gives comfort and escape, even though stagnation is the very thing we should be escaping from. So to sum this up, back then people redefined virtue because they had no other choice. They had no power. But nowadays people are redefining virtue even though they do have power, even though they have a certain sense of agency. So that makes me question, what are the reasons and what are the motives behind redefining virtue? Is it to support laziness? Is it to support weakness? Is it to outsource responsibility and feel good about one's miserable self? And if the way how I'm putting it tends to be true, well then the answer to misery, shame, resentment, and guilt is not moral redefinition. It's responsibility. And what's the easiest way how to acquire it? Well, maybe start accepting that you are not as broken as the internet has made you believe. Also understand that you always have the ability to adapt and change for the better thanks to neuroplasticity, and therefore you also still have the right to live a flourishing life. And that the only person that is preventing you from living one is not the person with a different political opinion, not the immigrant, not your ex, it's you. And if you're now asking how to actually do this in practice, here are some answers. Slowly and steadily, yes, you heard that right, not try to do everything in one day because that's not gonna happen. It's never gonna happen. In fact, that's gonna make things much worse. Slowly and steadily replace bad habits with good habits, anxious reactivity with emotional intelligence, ignorance of curiosity, and resentment with compassion. And if you're now saying, okay, you just defined vaguely what to do, I want books, I want podcasts, I want articles that I can read, ask any AI, ask Gemini, ask Claude, ask GPT. You will get really good answers. Of course, make sure to prompt it well, because the better the prompt, the better the answer. But there is so much knowledge that these AIs will allow you to access, which is why I just start listing exactly where you want to better yourself, and you will receive a good answer. You will receive all the videos, all the podcasts, all the studies that you need in order to better yourself. It's ironic because the cost of knowledge has never been as low as it is today. It has never been easier to access solutions to problems than it has been today. And that's why I strongly support the opinion that it has never been easier to fall into a miserable state today, but also it has never been easier to get back out of one. And this leads me to the answer of today's question: have we deliberately sabotaged ourselves? Partially, but the more important question is, can we deliberately make our lives better? Absolutely, because I've seen no law that is preventing us from being outside in nature, hanging around with other people, and becoming more knowledgeable. Until that is the case, Making a lifestyle of how shit you feel is going to do nothing than make your life worse than it already is. I already said this in the beginning of the video, but I'm going to repeat myself. The biggest crisis, the biggest problem that my generation is currently having is accountability. Making a lifestyle out of being damaged, accepting that one has no ability to better oneself, and that one is screwed, that one is doomed, that one's life has ended before it has even begun, and that things are only going to get better, that society, that the division, that the comparison, that the hate amongst each other is only going to go away once we start changing and taking responsibility for our own lives and actually start engaging in a lifestyle that is promotional, flourishing, and happiness. And with that, see you in the next one.